Okay.
Okay, welcome everybody to the 38th episode of the series Decolonizing the Mind. I'm happy to be joined again by brother Imam al-Asi from Washington, who did the 45 volume on Quran. 15 have been published, 15 are finished, and another 15 are in the process of being produced. It's an encyclopedic work. So we are talking with an expert, by far one of the most best experts on the Quran. Um, Today's our last session. We did a series. Unfortunately, he fell ill, but he's now very well again. Happy to see you in a healthy condition. Um, and we're going to discuss the question of Quran and culture. And for non-Muslims who are not pious, sometimes it seems as if the Quran gives a lot of restrictions on what you can do and cannot do in culture. For example, let's say, is it forbidden to have artists drawn pictures of human beings or animals? Or why are there the prohibition on eating? What kind of prohibition are there in food? uh, are there specific prescriptions on dress code, and so there are a lot of things there. But at the same time, 2 billion people out of the 8 billion now are Muslims, and they live in very diverse conditions, from Saudi Arabia to, let's say, Malaysia or Indonesia, very different cultures. So let's look what the Quran says about culture. So maybe let's start with the idea of what is culture in the vision of Quran. How would you describe culture?
Okay, that's obviously the topic is very wide open in this area, and there's quite a few ideas that come to mind. But generally speaking, to begin with, um, there are two types of, I mean, we can approach culture and understand the word culture uh, in two dimensions. The first dimension is an Islamic or a Quranic culture. And the second one is a local or a domestic type of culture. So, and here is if someone is taking a broad look at the Islamic geography uh, and looking at it in an objective way, uh, you can determine that there are in many areas two cultures that are interplaying or interacting with each other. The first one is the Quranic culture, and the second one is the native culture, if you want to call it that. And obviously, the Quranic Islamic culture has its standards, its morality, obviously because it was revealed by uh, the one who created us and knows our nature and our disposition better than anyone else, whether it's a philosopher or whether it's a political thinker or whoever. So we have that. That's a fix. That's a given. In some areas of the Muslim world, those Quranic Islamic considerations marginalize the local culture. And then you have the other way around. In some areas, the local culture overrides more or less the Islamic culture. And this is applied to the different aspects of the culture. whether we are speaking about art or whether we are speaking about human behavior or whether we're speaking about dietary rules and laws and regulations, etc., etc. So the problem that is generated in the public mind is they look at all of this as an Islamic culture. If someone looks at Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan or some very unstable cultures, they say this is all Islam. This is what Islam and this is what the Quran is saying. And so they get the impression that the Quran and Islam are repressive and degrading and even humiliating and are not equipped to function in modern society. And
Well,
that's a
let's
fallacy.
take, yeah, let's take one, art. You know,
Right.
we'll take visual art. Every society has visual arts. You know, there are artists. So, how is the Quranic view on visual arts? Are there prescription what you can do and not do in visual arts?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to answer that question, the Quran, there's a chapter in the Quran called An-Naml, which translates as the ant, A-N-T. And in that chapter, there are verses that speak about the art of building statues, and this pertains to Prophet David. Muslims consider David to be a prophet. He wasn't a king. In Judeo-Christian religious literature, David was a king. In our Islamic belief, David was a prophet, a messenger from God. So he, in his society, they were building statues, tamathil, the Quranic word for it, يَعْمَلُونَ لَهُ تَمَاثِيل. They manufacture for him, for Prophet David, statues. So the problem arises from a quote that is attributed to the Prophet, and much of our internal Islamic problems are located in the literature that is attributed to the Prophet, because some of that literature is valid and some of it is not valid. So one of the quotes that is attributed to the Prophet is, of course, I can quote it in Arabic, but the English is the medium here. So the translation of that hadith or that quote from the Prophet is, those who are going to be punished the most severe in the hereafter are going to be the artists, or those who do drawings, those who put figures onto either they do it on paper or they do it, they sculpt, they do it in rocks and these types of things. So here is where you bring me into an internal Islamic issue that we, the Muslims, have not settled with in a conclusive manner. Because there are some Muslims that say, well, if the Quran is saying that statues are permissible, then if there's a quote, because there's no contradiction between the Prophet and the Quran. So if the Quranic verse is well established, recognized by everyone, but when we come to that hadith quoted, they say, those who believe in it, quoted by the Prophet, then we have a contradiction here in meanings. So when we have that occur, and it does occur on some occasions, and this is one of them, when we have that occur, then we sideline the prophetic quote because it conflicts with the consensual verse in the Quran, and we say it's permissible. So it's permissible to have statues, to have figurines. Of course, we can't worship them, or we can't say that these are gods and things like that. But we can draw, and we can have cartoons, and we can have, pictures and motion pictures, and these are permissible. There's no problem with that. The Quran states that, or gives us the license to do that. Now, this conflicts with, some administrations in certain Muslim countries that have the hadith overrule the Quranic verse, and they say, no, you can't have that, we can't have that. And even those who say that, contradict themselves, because they say, like in Saudi Arabia, let me be more open about this. In Saudi Arabia, up until several years ago, it was prohibited to have pictures drawn and these types of things. But when it came, this is where they contradict themselves. They even said photographs are prohibited. But then, because of necessity, they were having their passports and their driver's license with photographs on it. So you're living a contradiction here. How do you say, on one hand, religiously it is not permitted, and then on the other hand, you're having it done in governmental transactions?
So there's no clear verse in Quran that says you cannot draw visuals of individuals, or no.
There's no such verse in the Quran. You will never find such a verse in the Quran.
Okay, and then, but what about the quote that the artist could go to hell?
Yeah, that's the one I was referring to.
Yeah,
that's not a verse in the Quran.
Oh.
That's a statement attributed to the Prophet.
Oh, I see.
It's not a Quran.
It's not in the Quran. Okay.
No.
All right.
No.
Okay, and then the other thing, where does the food restrictions come from? Alcohol, pork.
Yeah, those are Quranic verses that make it very clear that every and any type of intoxicant is prohibited. Any habit-forming substance is prohibited.
So it's not only alcohol, it's also drugs.
Yes, anything that can get you hooked on something.
Addiction, then.
Addiction is absolutely prohibited. That's very clear in the Quran.
But when you drink alcohol without an addiction, is that permitted then?
Yeah, no, it's not permitted, because it leads to, there are exceptions, but the general human behavior is, there's a tendency. A person may say, I'm going to drink some alcohol, but I'm not going to get addicted. So when you open that door, addiction becomes part of society. You show me a society in which alcohol is permitted and there's no addicts to it. It doesn't exist.
No, but on the level of the individual, there are many individuals who drink without being addicted.
Yeah, but here is where society trumps the individual. We're looking at the social character of society versus the individual character of a person. So if society is going to suffer from addiction, then the individual is not permitted to have it.
Even if he's not addicted?
Even if he doesn't get addicted. That's correct.
Okay. And the pork prescription?
That's also, when it comes to meat, this is a very interesting area. There's a verse in the 5th chapter of the Quran called Al-Ma'idah, the table spread. And in it, there are these verses that prohibit the consumption of certain types of meat. One of them is dead meat. If an animal dies, meaning not slaughtered, if an animal dies of natural causes, let's say, or even if he dies, if there's a sheep or a goat that falls from a mountain cliff and dies, you, you can't eat that type of meat. It's
Because
prohibited. Okay, the explanation for this is, thank God, we have now scientific investigations and probes in this area. The meat, the flesh or the meat of an animal has blood in it. Obviously, the tissues and the organs, they all have blood in them. And in order for the meat to be edible, in order for us to be permitted to eat the meat, the maximum amount of blood has to be drained from the tissues and the organs of the animal that we are going to eat. Let's say it's a sheep or a goat or a chicken or whatever, with the exception of the pig and the hog. Those are, whatever you do, those, the pig and the hog is not permitted to eat at all. But
why?
the other, huh?
Why?
Because it's quoted in the verse in the Quran. حرمت عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم
So we can't eat
الخنزير.
those animals. But is there in the Quran an explanation why you can eat a pig, but you can eat a chicken?
Uh, yeah, because it's harmful to your health.
The pig meat is harmful to your health.
Oh yes, you will find even non-Muslims, let's say bodybuilders. One of the first rules of bodybuilding is avoid pork. And even those who study the meat itself will find that there are certain types of worms in it that they tell you, those are who eat it. Forget about Muslims, that this type of meat has to be cured or has to be cooked until it's burned to get rid of that pathogen in the meat.
Okay.
So we go back to the issue of meat, because pork is it's off limits. No Muslim can entertain the idea of having pork. But then there's other types of meats, and those types, the ones that we're familiar with, we go to the supermarket, besides the pork, and you see all of these other types of, except for seafood. Seafood is permissible. All the wide range of seafood is permissible.
Okay.
So there's no issue with seafood. But when you come to red meat, or the domestic animals that we usually consume, the issue is that the body of that slaughtered animal has to be drained of the blood that's in the tissue, because in the verse itself, blood itself is prohibited. Human beings cannot consume blood. Right. And so we can't consume blood by itself, and we can't consume blood that's in the meat.
Okay, clear.
So we have to get rid of the maximum amount of blood from the animal that is going to be slaughtered. And how that's done, it's called halal. The Islamic word for preparing the meat is called halal or dhabiha. And this is done by slaughtering the animal, but not cutting off the neck area where the central nervous system runs from head to the rest of the body. The reason you leave that part of the animal, you just sever the arteries here in the front of the neck. So what happens when that occurs, the animal itself, there's signals going out from the brain through the central nervous system to the rest of the body that the brain needs the oxygen. When the animal is slaughtered, the brain becomes deprived of the oxygen. So the nervous system goes into high alert, And all of these signals are sent to the rest of the animal, the body of the animal, to send oxygen to the brain. And oxygen travels in the blood. So the body pumps out all of the blood that's in it. So now we eat meat without the
Okay.
blood
Yeah,
that's in
that's
the.
clear. The explanation is clear.
Yeah.
Let's take another issue, dress code.
Dress code. There's the general rule of dressing is a woman. A woman. Let's take men. Men are required to cover all of their body except for their private parts. I mean, the other way around. Men can expose all of their body except for their private parts. Now, here is a little fine philosophical argument among scholars, fuqaha, or jurisprudential seniors. What constitutes a private part? Is it, that what we call the penis and the anus? Is it just that? Or does it extend from the navel to the knees? So there are, depending on how that's defined, men have to cover that area. So generally speaking, without getting into these hair-splitting details, men are required to cover between their knees and their navel, their belly button. That's generally the rule for men. Besides that, they can,
Shaving, is that having a beard, is that for men required, adults?
Uh, this is also one of those gray areas in which some would say, yes, it is required, and others would say it's not required. It's better to have a beard. You don't have to have one. It's just better to have one.
But what does
So
the Quran say about it?
no, there's nothing in the Quran. There's nothing about beards. No,
Okay.
but in the Quran, there's a concept called fitra. Fitra means our God-given human nature. So some people would take that word in the Quran and say, okay, if God has given us in our human nature has given us a beard, why are we shaving it? So from that approach, they say a beard is required because it's part of the way God presented us.
Okay.
But the others say no, that's not the case. You can shave your beard because it doesn't harm your health. Because the bottom line is, what is going to harm you? So if shaving your beard is not going to harm your health, and here I think we can refer this subject to dermatologists that know much more about what happens when we shave, especially every day or every other day or whatever. Is there going to be an adverse effect on our skin or not? So it takes us into that area. So that's as far as men is concerned. The tricky issue becomes women. The dress code for women. The dress code for women, there are verses in the Quran that say that women have to cover their charms. And the charms are defined as the attractive parts of the body of women, because the way human nature operates, men, because of the visualization of women, are attracted to them more than is the case with the visualization of women towards men. That's why men don't have to cover their whole body like women do, but women do. So they have to cover their charms. Now we come to the internal Islamic scholarly mind and say, well, how do you define charms? The overwhelming across the board definition of charms is the whole body except for face and hands. Now there are those who take it, to the extreme and say even the face has to be covered. And there's really no Quranic basis for that. They rely on some of these very unsubstantiated quotes from the Prophet. There's a whole hundreds of thousands of quotes attributed to the Prophet that have not been scrutinized in light of the Quranic context, even after right now almost 14 centuries. So this is a homework that has yet to be done by the Muslims. And here's where you have, if you ever see Muslim women covering all of their face except for their eyes, and even wearing gloves and all this actually does not have any Quranic basis to it.
Okay. Let's take music.
Right.
People allowed to dance and do all these jolly things with music.
Yeah, music in and of itself, there's no Quranic prohibition on music. But there is prohibition on stimulating or instigating the passions of men and women. If some types of music arouse, let's say, a passion, and I mean passion here in the sexual sense, then that is not allowed. It's not
Is there a verse in the Quran that says that?
No, is not directly. The verses in the Quran speak about our moral character. So any type of music, and all music is not the same. Rock music, hard rock music is not like jazz. So there are different classifications of music. The classifications of music, if someone was to go, I've never been in one, but I read a lot and I'm aware of these issues. If someone was to go into a cabaret, a nightclub, are you going to be listening to soft music? The one that is going to be mild and soothing, or are you going to be listening to an arousing type of music? So the arousing type of music, not the concentration is not on the music itself, it's on what is going to impact our moral character.
So but it's not in the Quran. There are no verses in the Quran specifically about music.
No, there's nothing
about passion, and then passion derived, from music and so, but not specifically on music.
There is one verse in the same chapter that I was referring to earlier about art and drawing in these things, sculptures and statues and these things. Ya jibalu awwibi ma'a Dawood. The verse says, it's speaking about the mountains, and it's saying, well, the meaning of the verse is when the winds have a type of reverberation with the mountains, they create a type of tone. So that is permissible. The Quran is telling you that is permissible. Not permissible. It's part of nature. So it's saying in a very indirect way, and that's why, you cornered me on this, in a very indirect way, that the sounds that come from nature, like let's say if you go into a jungle and you hear the chirping of birds and all of those are favorable. Those are things you should be listening to. And then there's another verse.
In the time of the Prophet, people also played music.
Oh, yes, they did. And in the Prophet's time, there was music that was played using only about 3 instruments. There were, and right now we have, I don't know, dozens of musical instruments. But at that time, there were 3 types of instruments. And the Prophet listened to it, and they were played during marriages and during, times of happiness and this. And it was fine. There's no contradiction here. As I said, the bottom line in delineating the issue of music is whether it's going to arouse our feelings to do something that is prohibited. That's but there's another verse in another chapter called Luqman in the Quran that says the worst type of sound or voice is the one that is done by donkeys. So this would offer for specialists who are in this area, they can take a donkey's voice and put it on the scale. You know, they have a measuring scale of the quality or the quantity, the ups and downs of a voice. And then from there on, they can determine, okay, on this scale, the more the music type of production is similar to a donkey, the more it should be disliked. It's not like saying, oh, you can't listen to it, because if that's the case, Muslims would have gotten rid of donkeys, but they never did.
Okay. So we covered a few of these things about how the Quran looks at culture, right? And to what extent it promotes because culture, music, food, dance, all these things create the happiness of people,
Right.
and whether Quran is limiting in that or is enabling that, etc. So that is basically the purpose of this. And your argument is that there's a lot of things that the Quran doesn't prohibits a lot of these things within the text of the Quran. It's the interpretation of it, and often also linked to sexuality.
Right.
That is
Right.
the basic of it, right?
Right.
Okay, thank you very much for this introduction
Sure.
into Quran and culture, and thank you very much for your cooperation during all these dialogues. I enjoyed it, and I think many more people, enjoyed the content and the lessons we took from it. So, thank you again, and all the best.
You're very welcome. Anytime I can be of any um, interaction in the future, just consider me a click away.
Thank you very much. All the
Okay.
best. Okay,
Thank
bye.
you. Bye.